It was a tale of two seasons practically for the Golden State Warriors this year, where the first half of the season, they were a pretty competitive team. In the second half of the season, the regular season, I may say, it seemed like they were going to be an actual contender to win the NBA Finals. Had a Steph Curry hamstring injury not occurred, who knows what could have been after quote unquote upsetting Houston in the first round. I say in quotes because they were actually favored in the series, despite Houston being the number 2 seed. The Golden State Warriors lost in 5 games to the Timberwolves. So they took game 1, then lost 4 straight without Steph. So what could have been if Steph stayed healthy? Who knows? But we're going to dive into the players that are intriguing for Dynasty. Hint, there's only a couple. And then some of the other players that are intriguing for fantasy in general and what they mean in Dynasty, because some of these older players definitely still hold value and can make an impact in your Dynasty league, despite not holding the same value that some of these younger upside players still hold. Now, with that being said, probably the most valuable Dynasty asset on this team is one of those older guys. So we'll dive into that. That's not any sort of secret to be holding on to who that player is. But we'll talk all things Warriors to try and figure out where do they go from here and how do they potentially return to contention next season. Before we dive into that, I just want to remind you guys that BetOnline is the world's most trusted betting platform and your number one source for all your sports betting action. Baseball season is in full swing. We are getting to the end of the NHL and NBA playoffs. We saw the Thunder advance to the NBA Finals. We've got a Saturday night Pacers-Knicks Game 6 in Indiana, where the Pacers are currently favored by 3.5 points. If you want to get in on the action, BetOnline is a great place to do that. If you think that the Knicks could still win this thing in 7 games, you can bet on the full series. Right now, it says that the Knicks are plus 274 to win this series. So if you are a true believer in this New York squad, BetOnline's a great place to let that be known and potentially reap some benefits from that. They have the largest selection of odds on everything from the MLB to the NHL to UFC. And BetOnline also remains the number one online source for all your sports wagering info. And then in between these games, you can head over to the BetOnline casino with all the top Vegas-style games, including poker and a live casino. BetOnline, the game starts here. Okay. If you're watching, you're seeing this extra zoomed in camera for some reason. I messed with it a little bit before to try and see if I could fix it, but it's not happening. But so it's extra zoomed in for some reason today. Cool. We're rolling with it. No big deal. We're going to talk about the Golden State Warriors, as I mentioned, who over the past decade plus, have been one of the most dominant franchises in professional sports, in American sports. Can't necessarily compare their legacy to every single professional sports league across the globe. I don't have that information in front of me to do that, but in American sports, one of the most dominant franchises of the past 10 to 15 years. They've remained competitive over the last few seasons, despite the changes that they've kind of undergone. And a lot of that has to do, obviously, with Steph Curry. And as long as Steph is playing, this team is going to have a chance to win a championship every single season. Now, they do need to get him more help because he was keeping them afloat by himself practically first half of the season. Bringing in Jimmy Butler helped a lot second half of the year just to make things easier on Steph. Because Steph is still Steph, even if he isn't MVP level Steph. He's still one of the best players in the league. But they need him to be healthy. And how do you keep him healthy? Well, you manage his minutes during the regular season. You limit his games. You do what you can to keep him fresh for the playoffs. You do that by having a talented roster around him. If Steph has having to play 35, 36 minutes per game like he did down the stretch of the regular season just for this team to be competitive, because that was another change. They brought in Jimmy Butler, but Steph also saw his minutes go up second half of the season. So that type of change takes a toll on a player that's 37 years old, takes a toll on his body. So how do they avoid that? Well, they got to add talent. This team is, I don't remember if it was that they basically said, or if it was reports that basically everyone not named Steph, Draymond, or Jimmy Butler was going to be available this offseason to potentially add more talent to this team, to give them a chance to win one more ring, maybe 2 more rings if it goes according to their plan, with Steph and Draymond still on the roster. So what assets do they have to work with? Well, they have the number 41 pick in this year's draft. Now, prior to all these players deciding to go back to college, I think the number 41 overall pick, you were going to have some options, and you could probably go a little deeper into this draft past 41 and still get some very talented players. And there's still a chance that that happens, that they're able to get someone at pick 41 that is able to step into a role in year one. But the odds have significantly lowered just based on who's actually going to be in this draft now. But that's still an option for them to potentially get someone. Right now on Tankathon, they have Drake Powell going 41. That would be a home run hit. I think of Drake Powell as closer to a first round talent, late first, maybe even closer to mid first round player than I do think of him as a second rounder. But this isn't necessarily a perfect mock draft, but there are some players that are projected to go, according to this mock, just a little bit earlier, projected to go a little later, that could step in and play a role. Probably not anything game changing for Golden State. They're not going to win a championship because they added someone in the second round. That's not going to happen. They can add someone that can play a role, but if the difference between them winning a championship and not winning a championship is hitting a home run on their second round pick, yikes, we're not super optimistic. But as far as their future draft capital, this team still has pretty much all of its first round picks, which was pretty surprising to me when I was pulling this up. They have their own pick. They don't have many seconds, but 2026 through 2029 and 2031, they have their own first round pick. Their 2030 first round pick is, I believe, top 20 protected. And if it does fall in that protection, then it'll turn into a 2030 second round pick that will head to Washington. So basically, unless Golden State is doing a lot better in 2030, or is still where they are right now in 2030, because this year their first round pick would have been 20, but it went to Miami. So around where they are right now, if it's a better pick, then they would keep it. If it's not, if they're still competitive, then who cares? And then that pick will go to Washington. So you still have a lot of draft capital to work with. You can't trade your first round pick in consecutive years, but you can trade swaps. So they could potentially after the draft do something like where they're trading their 2026 and 2028 first round picks and their 27 and 29 and 2031 pick swaps, or vice versa, 27, 29, 31 unprotected 26 and 28 swaps. They could do something like that. I don't know if because if it's top 20 protected first, maybe they would not be able to do the 2031 and 2029 unprotected, but still they have options where they can move some of these first round picks to add talent to this roster. And then you just need to make the contracts work. Who could they bring in? Well, I mean, if Giannis is available, then you make Giannis work. You make that work. And I don't know what type of trade that even looks like, but they have enough draft capital to make it intriguing. And then it's about parting with a player or players to match contracts. So if we're looking at who they have under contract, a lot of these guys that are important are going to be back. So Steph, Jimmy Butler, Draymond, Buddy Hield, Moses Moody, Brandon Pajemski, Trace Jackson Davis, they're all under contract for next season. Gui Santos, Quentin Post have team options, probably get picked up. Pat Spencer is a restricted free agent based on what he showed kind of late in the season. And even in the playoffs, just as a role player, I don't see a reason why they wouldn't bring him back. Kevon Looney and Gary Payton, the second, are both unrestricted free agents. I would assume that both of them are back, assuming like that makes sense to them cap-wise, because both of those guys are solid role players. And Looney's been there forever, and Gary Payton Jr. has been a very good defender for them in recent years. And then, of course, the big headline free agent is Jonathan Kuminga being a restricted free agent and seeing what happens there. I'm assuming that Golden State will look at keeping him at a certain price, but if he's able to fetch more in the open market from a different team, I don't think it's a guarantee that Golden State matches any offer that he gets. We'll see. He could, or they could, and he could be back, but not entirely sure. And is it possible that he's using a sign and trade to bring in a star? I don't even know, again, exactly how that would look. If Kuminga and picks is enough to bring in a player like Giannis, or if Kuminga and picks or a pick for Kevin Durant. Um, Not sure exactly what that looks like. A different star that could be available. Like that would be they have the pieces that if they want to, they can make a move or two to make this a very, very good team without sacrificing too much of their young talent. Sure, they could detach someone like a Brandon Pajemski. They probably aren't super interested in that, but someone like that to sweeten the pot a little bit for another team. Now, that's going to be something that they have to decide. Is it worth multiple firsts, Pajemski, who they've been very high on, and Jonathan Kuminga? Who's that worth? Is that, I mean, like Giannis, yes, but is there anyone else that could be available that would be worth that trade package for the Warriors? I'm not sure. But I think that this team, it feels like a lot of these teams that have, I guess, kind of pushed all their chips in. It seems like that's what they've done. They've pushed all their chips in. They don't have too many more is counter options, counter moves to work with now that it hasn't really worked out for them. Milwaukee's in a situation like that where, yeah, they hold one of the best pieces in the NBA, but if they don't trade him, they don't trade Giannis, then they're probably just going to continue to be a competitive team in the East without really having a chance to win a championship. So we'll see what Golden State ends up doing, but they don't feel like they're totally as screwed as you might think. Is a pretty interesting way of putting it because it feels like, oh, like when Steph retires, then they're done. Well, not necessarily. Like obviously you don't have Steph anymore, so yeah, that changes things for sure. But they have a few young pieces, and they have most of their first round picks. If for some reason Steph Curry said tomorrow, yeah, I'm kind of done with this whole basketball thing, I'm retiring, they could tank the next 4 years. They'd have their first round pick to do that. And then they could continue to take after that if needed, because that 2030 first is top 20 protected. So they would have all their picks to do that. Or they can trade all these picks and gear up with maybe not another 35-year-old star, maybe another 28-year-old star that can give them some reason to be optimistic about the team after Steph does retire. Golden State definitely has some options to work with. We'll see if they're able to make the right moves. All right. Talking about some of these players specifically and how we should value them in a dynasty league. Number one is still Steph Curry. He is still the most valuable player on this team in dynasty leagues, despite being 37 years old. Still the most valuable. And that's because he's by far the best in fantasy basketball, in category leagues, in points leagues. Like Steph Curry is the best player on this team, even outside of fantasy. I played 70 games this past season. That was very encouraging. 24 and a half points, 4.4 rebounds, 6 assists, 1.1 steals, and of course, 4.4 threes per game, which you're just not going to get that from many other players. His numbers, I guess his scoring numbers did dip slightly. Went from 26.4 points per game the year before to 24 and a half. But this was the second straight season that he played more than 70 games. He played 74 last year and 70 this year, which was encouraging because the last time he played 70 games in a season was the 2016-2017 season. It's crazy to look back and think about the discounted contract that they signed him to for a while there. Now he's getting paid according to his talent now, but for a while there, Golden State was able to have him on a pretty team friendly contract because he had missed a lot of time his third NBA season. But a lot of his seasons early on, he was playing most of the season. So it's pretty interesting. But since the start of the 2017-2018 season, he played 51 that year, then 69, 5, 63, 64, 56, and the last two seasons, 74 and 70 games. I was at 32.2 minutes per game this year, second straight season, under 33 minutes per game. I think like some players you could say that having them tick down their minutes a little bit, yeah, it's going to impact their statistical output. Like, it makes sense. But Steph's still a player that, even if he's playing 32 minutes per game and not 34, 35, still going to be one of the best players in fantasy basketball. Even if he only has, say, 2-3 seasons left. I mean, he's under contract for 2 more seasons, including this year, and then 2 more seasons after that. So he could use that as a great opportunity to say, okay, I'll play at least 2 seasons, and then I'll call it quits. But 2 seasons of Steph is more valuable than pretty much having anyone else on this team. So I guess keep that in mind. Hold to him tight, especially if you're on a contending team. If you're not in a position to win now, though, in your Dynasty League, then maybe it does make sense to move off of Steph. But he's still a very valuable player. Jimmy Butler is a little bit harder to evaluate because we know he's a really impactful player, but we haven't necessarily seen him playing a significant amount of games. But he was able to come in and play at a high level for the Warriors and led to a lot of winning. He played 30 games after the deadline, or after he was traded to Golden State, suited up for the first time, played 30 games. He only missed 1 game during that stretch. They went 23-8 and had the best defensive rating in the league after trading for Jimmy Butler, and the 3rd best net rating as well. So this was basically one of the best teams in the NBA after acquiring Jimmy Butler. So that should make you a little bit optimistic about what this Warriors team can do with it, even if they don't make too many changes or too many upgrades next season. Jimmy Butler being there will help this team be more competitive. After getting traded, averaged 17.9 points, 5.5 rebounds, 5.9 assists, and 1.7 steals per game. Still not hitting many threes and not shooting them at a high percentage, but not his game. Doesn't need to do that, especially in Golden State. Yeah, he'll continue to, when he's on the court, to be impactful, but that's kind of the issue, is he hasn't been on the court a ton since his Chicago days. He's the 65 game threshold is fairly new, but he hasn't played 65 games in a season since the 2016-2017 season. He played exactly 65 games the 2018-2019 season, but it was split between Minnesota and Philadelphia. So he hit 65 games there. Having to do the math, which wasn't difficult math, but I just hadn't done it yet. But we know he's going to be really good when he's on the floor. Hopefully his renewed love for the game, he got his joy back. Maybe he plays 65, 70 games for Golden State next year. Says, hey, he'll be 36 at the start of next season. He doesn't have many seasons left. Let's go all out for this one. Let's play as much as possible. And part of that is just he just hopefully can stay healthier, because I think that's an underrated factor. Just the amount of players that sit out games. You just always forget that a lot of times they are very legitimate injuries, and sometimes they're playing through them, and then sometimes they're just not. And a lot of times everyone is playing through some sort of injury. So hopefully Jimmy Butler can just have a healthier season. But at the same time, they are going to try and maximize his availability and freshness for the postseason so they can make a run at another title. But that does limit his value. But again, when he's on the floor, still going to be very good. We're just going to keep going down as far as the scoring leaders for Golden State, which means that Jonathan Kuminga is next. Now, he's one of the more intriguing Dynasty assets that's currently on this team, but we're not entirely sure if he will be on this team. It's interesting. I was doing the Roto World Q&A a little bit before recording this with Kurt Heelan and Raphael Johnson, and we were talking about Nick Clifford, who's a player that a lot of people like in this draft. It's probably going to go just outside the lottery, maybe right inside the lottery. Going to a team where he'll be able to contribute from day one. He's also 6 months older than Jonathan Kuminga. It's always fun to take the players that are older prospects about to be drafted and just seeing who they're older than in the NBA. But 6 months older than Jonathan Kuminga, so you can look at that one of two ways. One, there's a guy that's going potentially in the lottery that is older than Jonathan Kuminga. So this guy has so much untapped potential, and he's shown it in flashes. But you could also look at it as, ooh, Jonathan Kuminga is probably going to be making or need to be paid $30 million next season when you get a player that's actually older than him on a rookie deal. So it'll be interesting to see how teams analyze that, because it could be a team. I think Brooklyn is just a great spot, but Brooklyn could say, we have some cap space. We need to continue to add talent. Let's take a chance on this player that was a former top 10 pick. And let's give him a contract. By the time his contract expires, we'll probably have more lottery talent on this team, maybe have more of a young core. So if it doesn't work out, then we're good. Nothing dramatically bad happened to the outlook of this franchise. But it works out and Kuminga becomes the star that he was expected, or I guess Golden State thought he could be when they drafted him, then that's a win for a team like Brooklyn or another team. It doesn't have to be Brooklyn. I just think that they're a pretty good example. This past season, only played in 47 games, started 10 of them, averaged 15.3 points, 4.6 rebounds, 2.2 assists, and a 3. Did not shoot the ball well. Shot 45.4% from the floor after shooting over 50% in each of his first 3 seasons. Saw his minutes go down. Didn't have like a huge spot in the rotation. Was basically out of the rotation at the beginning of the playoffs, and then was able to play a little bit when Jimmy Butler got hurt, play a little bit when Steph got hurt. Had some nice scoring games in the postseason against Minnesota. Then maybe help him get a sizable contract this summer. For fantasy, I'm not super intrigued by him in a category league. In a points league, sure, the upside's there in the sense that he can play enough to get you a few assists, a few rebounds, and has a lot of scoring upside. So probably more intriguing in a points league, but not a great free throw shooter. Doesn't get you defensive stats. Doesn't hit a ton of threes. Doesn't shoot many threes, but also doesn't hit them at a high rate. So I'm not super intrigued by him. Now, that could change if we see him in a role where he's playing 33 minutes per game and has the ball in his hands the whole time. Maybe he's more productive. I think that would make him more intriguing, but it's still not like a player where you're saying he's getting limited in his minutes, and that's why his 9 cap value is limited. And we're just waiting on him to be in a larger role so we can see it become this widely productive across the board in the box score 9 cat superstar. I don't think that he has that. I think he can be a very, very good player, and I think that'll be helpful in points leagues, but I'm not really seeing that in category leagues based on what we've seen so far. Maybe things change. I don't know. Random things happen. Based on what we've seen so far, there's not really a reason to think that would be the case. The player that Golden State has been very high on, or one of the players, but specifically the young guy is Brandon Pajemski, who's been very good. And I thought he was really good second half of this past season. I know Jimmy Butler was, I guess, kind of the main addition that helped them have a lot more success second half of the year. But Pajemski, who had a really good rookie year, started off last season slow, missed a lot of time, and then finished the season really well, which was impressive. Averaged 11.7 points, 5.1 rebounds, 3.4 assists, 1.1 steals, and 1.8 threes per game. I mentioned a couple of strong postseason performances. He had 28 points in the Game 5 loss. Just finished the season on a high note as a scorer. Had another nice scoring game in the Houston series. And then a few other games, second half of the regular season, that were very productive. So he's a really talented player. 22 years old, turned 23 just after the All-Star break next year. One of the players on this team that is kind of a bridge towards the future. I don't think Pajemski is the guy that, when this current regime of Steph and Draymond and Jimmy Butler now, when they're retired, that Pajemski is going to come in now, all of a sudden he's the star. But I think he is a player that is a nice bridge in the sense that whoever the next franchise player may be, Pajemski will still be a really solid player to build with. And he's been a pretty solid fantasy player. Pretty well-rounded skill set. Can get you a steal per game, decent rebounder for a 6'4" guard, decent secondary playmaker, can space the floor. Free throw percentage and field goal percentage aren't ideal, but not terrible. He doesn't shoot a ton of free throws. And then he doesn't really turn the ball over, only 1.2 per game. So he's a solid fantasy player. I don't think he'll get the chance to pop with the way this roster is currently constructed, but he's definitely a player that's worth drafting in a redraft league. And I think that he definitely holds some dynasty value. He's fairly young, especially on this roster. He's one of the younger players. So Podziemski is definitely a valuable player, even if he may not have the same, I guess, pop as some other players that may be valued similarly. I think he'll just be a very solid player for a pretty long time. There's nothing wrong with that, but he's not this sleeper that we're waiting on to become the next big thing in fantasy basketball. Or he's not taking the reins from Steph Curry and all of a sudden is going to become the franchise. Just going down the list, Buddy Hield is Buddy Hield. You're going to go through the full Buddy Hield experience for better or for worse. Cool. Moses Moody, who was the same draft class as Jonathan Kuminga, got more of an opportunity this year. And I think he was decent. Had some decent stretches. Averaged 9.8 points, 2.6 rebounds, 1.3 assists per game. Started 34 of his 74 games, 22.3 minutes per game. Was a pretty consistent starter down the stretch and into the postseason. Didn't maintain that role for the entire playoffs, but was a pretty consistent starter for them, which was interesting. I don't think that he's necessarily going to maintain a starting role heading into next season, but he could. I think he's also certainly a player that could be included as a trade piece. He's set to make $11.6 million next year. First year of a 3-year extension where he's making that kind of like 11, 12, $13 million range. Could be tossed into a trade. Could be kept around. Either way, no worries. Actually, looking at this at the time of recording, his birthday's tomorrow, so shout out to Moses Moody. Happy birthday, man. If you're listening to this on the Saturday after that, it's his birthday. So go wish Moses Moody a happy birthday. Sorry to include your name in potential trade talks, man. But I think that there is still some upside, and he hasn't been what he's necessarily expected to be when he was drafted. Does Golden State want to continue to keep him around as a role player, or would another team be more interested in giving him a larger role and seeing what he can be? Because he's had some big scoring nights. Like, we know that there's talent there, but the Warriors don't necessarily need these super young scorers right now. They will in 4 years, but right now they're looking at who can fill different roles to maximize Steph Curry. So Moses Moody has been able to do that at times, but is there other players that they would be more intrigued by having that Moody could be moved for? It's possible. Still think there's a little bit of upside here, but based on what we've seen so far, there's not a ton of reason for optimism. But maybe if he ends up with the new team or just remains in Golden State after this current era is over, then maybe he's able to kind of finally reach his potential. All right, who else do we have in Golden State? Next leading scorer would be Draymond Green, who is going to continue to provide those well-rounded numbers. Perfect if you're punting points. Decent contributor of defensive stats, not consistently. I think that, like, just looking at his last few seasons, it hasn't been, I guess, what it once was is a fair way of putting it. But still, the rebounds and the assists. So this year, actually, I guess I'm wrong on that. Averaged 9 points, 6.1 rebounds, 5.6 assists, 1.5 steals, and 1 block. The year before, it was 1 steal, 0.9 blocks. The year before that, 1 steal, 0.8 blocks. So this year was one of his better steal seasons since his, I guess, peak in the late 2010s. Got over a 3 per game. Actually, his 1.2 threes per game were the most since the 2015-2016 season when he averaged a career high 14 points per game. Not a great 3-point shooter. As a matter of fact, when he hits one, it probably hurts more. Like if your team is playing against the Warriors, Draymond Green hits a three, that's going to hurt more than any other thing that can happen. But he's still a willing shooter. I think that's, he saw his 3-point volume increase this past season, factored into his field goal percentage, taking a hit. But he's also not shooting the ball a ton. He's just not. So he's not dramatically altering your team's field goal percentage. No big deal. The assists, the rebounds, and the defensive stats is really where he's making his money in fantasy basketball, and that's not going to change. He's going to continue to be Draymond Green, for better or for worse, and a lot of times that leads to some very productive stats and, frankly, wins. One of the, I guess, sleepers, more intriguing guys that kind of came on, Quentin Post. Wasn't really on anyone's radar. Was drafted in the second round, end of the second round, and ended up being a starter at times that was able to space the floor. I think this was more about, hey, we have a 7-footer that can shoot threes for the first time with Steph Curry, and this thing works pretty well. So I think that he was able to get minutes just because he was a pretty dynamic player. Averaged 8.1 points, 3.5 rebounds, 1.3 assists, and 1.7 threes per game. Shot 40.8% from three on 4.3 attempts. I think this is honestly, like, Quentin Post is a good player, like solid rotation piece, but I think his unique skill set in comparison to what they've had is part of the reason he's able to play a lot of minutes. They've never really had a floor spacing center, or they haven't often had a floor spacing center since Steph Curry's been in Golden State. Like DeMarcus Cousins, I think, was able to space the floor, but we're talking about like a true 3-point marksman. Quentin Post is that, and they haven't really had that often in the Stephen Curry era. So it's a new dynamic, opens up more space, opens up space for Jimmy Butler as well. I wouldn't value him too highly in a dynasty league, but he definitely holds some value in the sense that he was able to step in and play minutes in the rotation last year. Was very different from Trace Jackson Davis, who's another player we can briefly talk about, but Trace Jackson Davis wasn't able to even be part of the rotation for most of the second half of last season. He was able to get a couple starts in the playoffs, and some of those starts were like playing 3 minutes. That's it. Like he literally started the game and then didn't play anymore, which is weird, but whatever. I guess I would say I'd value Quentin Post higher than Trace Jackson Davis based on what we saw this past season. I think Trace Jackson Davis, if he's playing 25 to 30 minutes per game, then he's a solid source of rebounds and blocks and high field goal percentage, traditional center stuff, but I'm not sure that happens next year. I'm not guaranteeing that Quentin Post is playing a significant role either next year. I think that they'll address the center position this offseason. Maybe that's where Kuminga ends up in a sign-and trade. Maybe someone else gets moved to bring in a better center. So I think Post as a reserve is more dynamic than Trace Jackson Davis in that role. So if they do bring in another center, having Post come in for 15 minutes per game is more likely to happen than Trace Jackson Davis. So that's why I would say I'm a little bit more optimistic about Post the next few seasons than Trace Jackson Davis, but I don't value either of them too highly at this point. Post is just a bit more dynamic. But that's, there's a couple other players worth mentioning. D'Anthony Melton's not even on this. He got traded to Brooklyn in the Dennis Schroeder deal, and then Dennis Schroeder got traded, as did Lindy Waters. Gary Payton Jr. is, again, a solid role player, but not very intriguing for fantasy unless you need steals on a Sunday to close out a matchup. Pat Spencer, I think, is intriguing as a role player, but not super intriguing for dynasty purposes. But we'll see. Maybe, I don't like ruling anyone out and saying, there's no way this guy becomes good because they've already made the NBA. So there's something there. But I don't think Pat Spencer is a player that I'd be valuing very highly in dynasty leagues at this point. Nothing wrong with that. But that's going to do it as far as the Warriors, as I can't think of too many other things to talk about other than just speculate about potential trades, but I'm not sure exactly what that looks like or who they'd be interested in even trading for. But I think my bottom line is that maybe things aren't as bleak in Golden State or as dependent on winning right now as it felt like to me. But I think they do need to pick a lane. I think there's no reason to try and win with Steph again if you're not going to go all in. You're just going to try and see what you can do, throw out a competitive roster. That doesn't really make sense. But if you're going to go all in on trying to win another championship with Steph, which trading for Jimmy Butler shows that you're interested in that, I think they have to move some of these draft picks. And I think they're going to have to be willing to move off of Kuminga, which I think they're probably willing to do that, or move off of Pajemski or move off of Moses Moody if it brings in someone else that can help you accomplish that goal. But we'll see what they end up doing, how aggressive they end up being, and if they're truly serious about trying to win another championship with Steph Curry. But that's going to do it for this episode of the Young Man Squad Fantasy Basketball Podcast. We will be back next week. We've only got, I believe, 6 teams left to talk about over the next 2 weeks before we get into heavy draft stuff. So we'll be back to talk about Denver on Monday. And then, of course, we'll have Matt back on to continue with our Dynasty Startup mock. We'll get picks 49 through 72. And then after that, we'll keep going with the teams and eventually get to strictly draft talk, which is exciting. But yeah, if you can like, comment, subscribe to this episode, to the other episodes that I've done this week, or that we've done this week, which includes the Cavs, the Rockets, the Clippers, and then, of course, the draft with Matt, would be much appreciated. And if you can follow on Twitter at NoRuben22 with any questions, comments, concerns, thoughts, would appreciate all of that. But that's going to do it for this episode. I'm finally actually going to end it, and I will see you next week.